Alright, yo, I just wanted to make a quick video to describe some of the mechanics in BRF on normal, since we got some footage last night and not everyone will be able to PTR test. But basically, I'll just go fight by fight and kind of just yellow it. So this is Gruul. We have three groups, two groups. One where the tank is, because his tanking debuff is actually a 10-yard smash on the ground on that current tank. You'll see the little fractures on the ground beneath me. So tanks can't stand on each other. Every 100 energy, he does his Inferno Slice, which is basically like if you ever did Brutalis, it's Meteor Slash. It splits between the group and applies a debuff, making it so they take more damage for subsequent ones. On normal, we can do one stack per group, and it'll reset in time. The tanks, and I don't know if this is going to be 3-tanked on Mythic, it might be a thing. The tanks have to take multiple stacks because, as you see, my my fractured thing, my tank debuff, has a minute duration, and the slash has a 30-second duration. It comes out about every 20 seconds. So I actually end up taking 3 in a row, shield walling for the third, and then Lozy takes it, and that'll be Snipe, obviously, during the live stuff. But then I run away, I let my debuff drop. I actually refreshed it here like a dumbass. Oh wait, no I didn't. My stack's too small. Anyways, so, and then I stay in between the groups here because I don't want to be near Lozy if he gets meleeed, if he's on his way over for the Infernal Strike, because then I'll refresh my tank debuff, which takes, yeah, a lot of damage on me. Throughout this whole phase, he does this overhead crush. There's plenty of time to move out of it, but it can happen right before an Inferno Slice, so you have to get back into position afterwards. The other thing he does here that I don't ever get to see because I'm a tank is Petrify. He basically selects random people from the raid, I think about some scaling amount, but about a third of the raid to be petrified. They get slowing movement speed over the course of I think 6 seconds or 8, anyways, and at the end of it they get frozen in place, and then they shatter, dealing damage to all players within 8 yards or 10 yards. That makes it so those people have to leave the soak groups, and that's fine. We'll have extra people, but you have to just leave in time, and then as soon as it's off, get back into your group. This right here is his intermission phase. I don't know how many Infernal Slashes it takes for him to get into it, but we had 2 of these happen in the fight. And he just basically does this. He just overhead smashes over and over and over, and it does fucking nothing if you don't get hit by it. It does slight raid damage, but if you get hit by it, it does like 200k, 180k I think on normal. This will probably one-shot you on Heroic and Mythic, but as you can see, it's pretty easy to move out of. I imagine the cast time will be a lot shorter in other difficulties. And that's the gist of this fight. The big thing we'll have to coordinate for Heroic and Mythic is cooldowns for the tanks if we're not 3-tanking, so that they can drop their Inferno Slice, or take 2 and 3 without being in danger of dying. Some tanks can apparently take this damage and get healed through it if they get enough healing. Like Purgatory on Death Knights and stuff, paired with a cooldown, can live pretty easily through it. At least on normal. And then those things, oh yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to mention. He'll create patches where the ceiling falls, and that does damage, obviously, and that field is actually pretty substantial damage. So what we may encounter during progression here is that we'll have to reposition the groups if he drops a field on them, and that won't be difficult. But we need to just be ready. So like one group will always be on his right leg, one group will always be on his left leg, and it's worth noting that Infernal Slash's conal effect is massive. So if you're in between the groups or you're not quite stacked on yours, you can get Infernal Strike from the other group, and that will just kill you. I'll go ahead and let this fight finish out. Oh, something I wanted to note too, regardless of whether or not you're going to get PTR testing in this round, still install the PTR, guys. Familiarize yourself with how to copy your characters and get your keybinds in there and stuff, because the PTR will be used for the rest of the tier, and we're going to test other content. The next tier will be used. Oregorger, I think, had some bugs, but the gist of it, I'll start with tanks. So the tank swap mechanic on this fight is called Acid Spray. And the tooltip says it's a frontal cone. It's pretty much wrong. I don't know if the tooltip is wrong or if the ability is bugged. But basically what will happen is the main tank, or the primary tank, will tank him roughly like this, maybe tilt him towards the range, which I think I reposition here in a moment. And then Acid Torrent rather. Acid Torrent targets the closest person to the boss. So with a debuff that hits for a ton and subsequent ones hit for even more. I got it there. What will happen, ideally, is that the off tank will get that and then taunt the boss, tank him, and then the other tank will tank the next one and then taunt him, and you'll just do that over and over and over. So you only get one stack per. The reason there's a tank swap at all is because of Acid Maw. It's just a poison that stacks on you. It doesn't even hurt very hard right now, but I imagine that's what we'll look for. It's about 3 or 4 stacks, and I think it's parry and dodgeable too because it's stacked at very different rates. It might even be blockable. The big thing, yeah, tanks will have to watch out for is just that cast. They go in there, they take the primary torrent, a secondary torrent goes out to a ranged member. They take about 300k damage, probably a little less, 250k damage. They may need a personal if we can determine who's going to go on beforehand. Something to watch out for in Heroic and Mythic. Melee have a shard that lands in them. You can actually see it there on the left. The shard lands, does knockback 75k AoE damage, and then after 3 seconds explodes for like 90k fire damage. So Melee will want to stack on 1 point, have it drop on that group, and then shift to the other side of the boss to avoid the explosion. You see they just did it there, though my camera fucked up. Oh gosh, it's annoying. The other thing he does is he has a cast. We'll have a interrupt rotation set up for this. He's supposed to do 5 in a row. He did it much more randomly, but basically if that cast gets off, it does, I think, 30,000 damage to the entire raid. And that's just the, yeah, that's the reason we interrupt it. This is his other phase here. This is gonna be tricky, mostly because range on healers matters most here. He does damage to the whole raid whenever he rolls, but it does more damage the closer you are. If he rolls through you, it will stun you and do like 100k damage. So you always want to be in between 2 roll points. He can never roll backwards from his current place, and he only has 2 choices no matter where he is. So I go to where he is behind because I know he can either go left or right there. And generally he could come towards square or he could go to the other side. He ends up going to the other side. I put square down here as just a place, like, once we kill the crates, kind of stay near here so that we can heal and be in range of healers. And then you also have options. So if he goes to square, now you want to be in between of the 2 different places, or yeah, just go behind. And Melee, you can follow him in this phase. It's not really dangerous. The big thing you'll have to watch out for is that he still technically rolls on you if you're not at max melee range, because you're just a little too close to his body when he starts it. But you'll see me get stunned by that later. And so this is the second range position. You guys go to the other place because we may still have some poison on the ground here, which it faded, but I think it might not on Mythic. And this is a rinse and repeat. Oh yeah, ranged. So what I forgot to mention, yeah, he throws out a little poison pool onto you guys, and you'll just kind of like zigzag towards the melee as he throws that out. So they're all stacked together. There's the wretched black rock shit. You guys move out of it and stay stacked. And then when the next one comes, that group will go to the side and just kind of keep zigzagging it like that. This guy's got a tight berserk. It's maybe something we encounter on Heroic, if not definitely Mythic. He was tightly tuned on Beta, and it looks like we were even close to it here. Yeah, so we just can't hit that. He's just kind of tightly tuned, so any deaths during his roll phase is bad. So he's going back into his roll phase here. Again, he can only either go like 2 directions, except I guess on the first one he could potentially go 3. He can never roll backwards, just know that. And he always has 2 choices. If he's up against like right there, it looks like he'll stop, but no. Like, if it's only like a 10-yard roll, he kind of hooks around to the wall and keeps rolling. Like, he never gets stunned on the wall. He only gets stunned on these little piles. See, now this is where I get stunned because I'm not at max melee range. You know, the big thing is just staying in between the two paths, so you always have a choice of where to go. Alright, Hanz and Franz. They are a shit show, and I don't really understand this fight as well as I need to. The big thing is range, you're going to want to spread out. They both target people with Body Slam, and it increases the physical damage they take by 30% for 10 seconds apiece, and it stacks. But you have time to move out, even if you're a melee and they target you with it. But it's just kind of general raid damage. That's one of the main things they do. Then they have their own pumped up phase when they hit 100 energy, which I'll describe when we get to it. Tanks, they have a mechanic where one of them picks you up and then throws you to the other guy. He catches you, and then he slams you onto the tank that is tanking him. And it does your max health and damage to each of you. So the big thing, you'll see it happen to me here. So he throws me onto Lozy like a dick. The big thing you'll have to do is just pop a personal there, and this is a graphic bug on this fight that is only on the PTR. I assume it won't go live. So this is the pumped up phase for Hanz. The belts turn on, and there's just avoidable mechanics that go through. It's pretty fucking easy stuff. The next one's actually much harder, but it's mostly just a learning curve. There might be one more mechanic for range that I'm not thinking of, but the big thing is just watch out for just have a nice spread and don't get hit by any of this stuff, because I think this stuff just automatically one-shots you. On PTR, there's a lot of complaint for this being buggy in that if you're not well out of something, it thinks that you're in it. So don't cut anything close in case this doesn't get fixed by live. Oh yeah, there's a disrupting shot. That's right. So disrupting is basically just like it is on Twins. If you're casting, it interrupts you. So watch out for that. Something to note, the belts move during each of their pumped up phases. You can stand in between the belts on that little like black strip, and you'll stop moving, which is great. You won't get pulled by the belts, but you're still able to get hit by the mechanics. So those things that slid down the belts, those little fire things, those will hit you. So you can just use it as like an intermission just to stop there and cast, but you'll have to still dodge the mechanics. So this one's interesting. This is Franz, and these come in patterns. If you look closely, you see how it does that? It goes down the whole room like that. And there's, I think, 6 different patterns that can happen, and it's random which ones happen, but he sends out 2 sets of each pattern and then changes pattern, I think, 3 times before his phase ends. And so we'll see most of the patterns during this attempt here. So that's one of the patterns, very center, and then out on each side, center, corners, corners. Pretty simple stuff. You just have to learn them really. And I think he does one more. Yeah. The big thing is staying near the corner of 4 of these like little plates of belts so that you have an option of where to go, and preferably near the center of the room. So like roughly where that blue marker is would be a good spot to stand, just because then you have 4 options to move, and since center is one of the most common places to get hit, then you always have options. I end up getting hit there. Something to note, and I don't do enough of it here as well, you can jump, so like just like Siegecrafter belts, and you get extra distance. There's a weird delay, but you do get extra distance, so jumping on this fight is definitely the best way to move. But positioning yourself correctly in the first place, obviously ideal. As far as the tank mechanic here, it's the tank who gets picked up is stunned the whole time, like Impale. So if you don't pop a cooldown beforehand, we'll need to call for an external for the healers, and healers you should keep track as well. I think I get one here where I don't get a shield wall off, and barrier ends up being enough, but it is physical damage, so our like passive armor still negates at least some of it. You can see, yeah. So here I get thrown. And then I get thrown into Lozy here. And we both take a good bit of damage. Lozy popped a personal there and still went down to about 30% health. I just only had shield barrier. And that's where I was testing to see if the strip would hit. And it does. You get hit even if you're like in between the strips. You have to give yourself at least like 3 yards on each of these. Normally, and I don't, this will be something Lozy will probably know, because normally they leave the arena when they start these phases, but they're obviously both here, so I don't know what changes. Maybe it's a sub like 20% little frenzy thing. They stay in the arena while they do their mechanics. But we end up killing this here with like 8 people or whatever. Perfectly clean kill. Alright, so Beastmaster, this was by far the hardest fight, I would say. It ramps up in difficulty out of nowhere pretty much the moment we trigger the dragon. So the order that we want him to get on his little mounts is elephant first, dog second, dragon third. He hops on an animal at 85% and then every 25% thereafter, and when he's on the animal that becomes the DPS. Like he loses his health bar, they get theirs, you kill the animal, then he hops off, you do 20%, hops onto a new animal, repeat. He retains abilities from them. He himself doesn't have anything but pin down. Pin down is just spears he throws, and also call beast or whatever. Anyways, pin down, he throws spears from the sky. You have about a second to move out of them. If you get hit, they pin you down until they get killed. You have to dodge this shit. It's a pretty basic move out of shit mechanic. The spears themselves don't do anything unless they pin you. They don't do anything until later in the fight. And so what we'll do is we'll just dot them up and ignore them until that point in the fight, and I'll talk about that later. But dodge, pin down is the moral of the story. If you get hit, we have to switch to you and break you out, and you're a dick. The other thing he does throughout the entire fight is call pack beasts or whatever, and they just come out of this entrance only where we're tanking the elephant. So we'll tank him there pretty much the entire fight, with the exception of phase 3. And we just AoE these down. Pretty simple. there's really nothing else to the mechanic. During all this, he's still being pinned down. The Iron Crusher itself, the elephant here, has two abilities. They have Stampede, where he charges out to range and does little stampy feet beneath him, so you just move. And then he has Tantrum, which just does raid-wide damage. When each of these beasts die, he retains one of their abilities. For the elephant, he retains Tantrum, so he just occasionally will just do a dick ton of raid-wide damage. Think Iron Quan in the last phase. After he dies here, oh yeah, he has a tank swap mechanic, just Crush Armor, reduces armor by 20% every stack, so we taunt at 2 stacks, and then the other tank gets the packs. Pretty simple. At this point, nothing's really dangerous. So now he's back off, he's at 85%, and we want him to trigger the wolf next. We pull him just slightly closer while still being next to the door so that we can get the packs in immediately. So he tantrums himself here during this. So now he's on the wolf. The wolf has a couple different abilities. One of them is Savage Howl, and that makes it so that all of the animals that are all the allies next to him gain 25% attack speed for 7 seconds. That's the ability he retains. He actually retains 2 of them, but it becomes a passive. The other ability he does is Rip and Shred. He leaps out to a ranged, casts it in an AoE around him, then leaps back to melee and casts it in an AoE around him. He also does it to the tank around the tank. So whenever he leaps out to ranged, melee and the off tank need to run out because they don't want this dot being applied to them. He does it roughly every 15 seconds and it lasts 30 seconds. So you want to drop that debuff. It's a ton of extra raid damage if you get a debuff of 1 or even 2 and maintain it. In Mythic, I imagine this will be something like Blaze Deadly. He retains this in the last phase or in the next 2 phases as well, so you need to get in the habit melee of running out every time he jumps out to the ranged. We taunt swap around 3 Rens, and the off tank needs to be sure to not stand on the main tank during this because they'll refresh their stacks. Something I noticed for tanks, it looks like, so he does leap back near the same position he used to, but he also might just leap back to the tank that he was at. I didn't get a chance to test it a lot, but his positioning was a little inconsistent, so definitely just give yourself space. So now he's back down, and what he'll do here is just passively give allies, like his allies, 75 or 25% attack speed when they get near him, which is fine. We just tank him near the boss anyways. The ads and just stun them. They have like no health on normal, and I imagine heroic will be fine too. In these videos we're scaled down to item level 650, so with our gear we'll probably melt all this shit. Alright, so these spears, actually, it's not until the next phase where they become a problem. But after this point, after we kill the dragon, these spears start pulsing raid-wide fire damage, and they fucking suck. So we'll do ranged full switch to all spears that drop at that point, but for the time being, we just keep dotting them and dodging them. Alright, so this boss does Infernal Breath, which is just a conal. We don't, the tanks don't position this. This targets on a random ranged. So ranged, ideally, what you want to do is dodge that and then stand next to the fire that it leaves, so that we can, you know, do a little clock pattern, like leave them all, like instead of having them scattered around the room, control the placement of them. He has a tank debuff that stacks really fast that increases the fire damage we take, but does nothing itself. The fire on the ground is extremely hard to see on the PTR, but it does about 20k damage a second. So you really have to watch out for that as a group. Tanks taunt at about 10 to 15 stacks. You can go higher, it's not really deadly. At this point I'm trying to save Dobbs, he got pinned down. And he's in the back, so none of the DPS switched. that's all he does during this phase, the dragon, but the boss retains his breath. And we move him to the center here to give everyone room, and we keep the boss in the center as we burn. That phase is where we use hero, but going back on it, I would probably use hero in this phase instead. So now we have ranged full swip to all spears, or swap to all spears whenever they drop, because they just do pulsing damage to the raid. So this is him doing the breath. He leaves a more visible fire, but it does the same thing. It just does damage if you stand in it, so ignore it and position yourself next to it so that the next breath can land there. He's pretty obvious about when he's doing these mechanics. He has huge animations for everything. During this, pin down's still going out, and he still leaps out to ranged, cleaves them, and then leaps back to melee and cleaves them. There's a lot going on. It's easy to get a lot of stacks of rip and shred, and this don't. It's super, super deadly. Range, you have to maintain a spread. As to dodge it, melee, you have to run out for every single rip and shred. And then during this whole time, we're still killing the packs that come, though they themselves are not very deadly. They're just extra damage and something to do for the off tank. He's also tantruming during this phase. So if you have extra damage on you, an extra dot while he's tantruming, it becomes extremely deadly immediately. So during this phase, we'll have to have a cooldown rotation set up, even for heroic, I bet. Mythic especially. I imagine this will be one of the hardest mythic fights out of the first starting fights. So during all this, he's still pinned down, remember. Yeah, this fight's really all about just knowing where you should be positioning-wise and just expecting pin down as ranged. There's not much you guys can do to dodge, rip, and shred. If you're not in position beforehand, you won't be positioned by moving, so don't try and dodge it. Just focus on the mechanics that matter. This is definitely going to be a fight where you're going to want to turn off certain bigwigs notifications and emphasize others, depending on what your role is. So just watch out for that. A lot of this is on a timer and scripted, though. It's more like on cooldown. But that's it, guys. This is BRF normal for these 4 bosses. I'll try and make a video for the rest of them. But if you have any questions, Dungeon Journal has the information. I can probably answer something at least.